database of English language newspapers showed that, a search of English language newspapers showed that in the last month alone, 10,000 stories have appeared with the words, the Great Depression. Why do some people think that that's not a crazy possibility? Why do some people think that this is possible? What are the similarities between now and the 1930s? Anyone want to take it on?
Well, people have the perception that we're heading, or could conceivably head for a Great Depression because of all the fear out there. When they hear recession, and now the U.S. looks like it's sliding into a deeper recession, something comparable to the early 1980s downturn. The next step beyond that is depression. But I think there's a misperception about what a Great Depression is. Remember, in the 1930s in the U.S., its economy contracted 27% between 1930 and 1934. That's a depression. Unemployment rate rose above 25%. Consumer prices collapsed by 25% as well. The worst we've seen since then, generally, outside of a big brief dip after World War II as defense spending pulled back in the U.S. and partly in Canada, was in the early 1980s when the economy contracted maybe 2-3%, the unemployment rate rose 4%. And I think that's a better benchmark to what we may be heading for, is that type of recession. The chance of a Great Depression is remote. We have much stronger social safety guards. When you lose your job today, you still have an income source to fall back on, so you keep spending. You don't stop spending, and then your neighbor loses his or her job, as happened in the early 1930s. And the policymakers have learned a lot in the last 80 years. All the evidence is the massive amount of monetary and fiscal stimulus put into the global economy just in the past year to eventually get things going again.
Just the other point between turning things from a recession to a depression. What happened, obviously, in the 30s was also that countries closed their doors to each other. Essentially, what they basically said, okay, we'll produce our stuff, and we're not going to let you sort of sell your products into our market. So that basically a protectionist policy overtook the world, okay? What we're seeing now is we're seeing the G7, G20 come together. What they're going to say, they're saying we want to work together. So the problem is, yes, maybe you didn't give us something concrete that we wanted, so we're going to sell you down some more, but at least they're working together. And everything they say is we're going to do what we can to get out of this together. So it's not an isolationist kind of policy that was introduced in the 30s. And that's really the radical difference, and that has to be understood.
So we're not going to see this precipitous decline in economic activity like we did in the 1930s. But how about this long, grinding, painful recession that might extend over 5, 10, 15 years? How likely is that, like in Japan?
That's the Japan experience. And again, unlike Japan in the early 1990s, the authorities right now have reacted very differently. Don't forget that in Japan, following the crash of their housing market, the policy was very contradictory. They were raising rates, and then they were lowering rates, and they were increasing taxes, not only to cut taxes, and then finally they go out with massive spending plans. So it was very contradictory. The banking system in Japan was not as cleaned up as it is now here. There were a lot of zombie loans, as they call them, loans that were not written off, and just cluttering the balance sheets of Japanese banks. So a lot of mistakes were made in Japan. Mistakes that served us well in the sense that we now know what not to do. And if you look at the policy reaction in the United States and in Europe since September of 2007, when this thing first showed up, massive reduction in interest rates, public spending, the partial nationalization of the banking systems. These are huge measures.
So the big difference is this Keynesian approach to economic slowdown, where you just spend a lot of money.